Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Storyriem. I'm so happy you're here today. So, get comfortable, take a deep breath, relax, and let me take you on a journey into the past. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you're standing inside a dark, cold factory. The air is heavy with the smell of oil and dirt. The floor beneath your feet is damp and freezing. All around you, children are working in silence. Clears throat. Some of them are only 10 years old. Their hands are covered in black stains. Their faces look tired. They have been working since early morning, and they won't stop until late at night. No one notices them. No one asks if they are hungry. No one asks if they are happy. Now, look toward the corner of the room. There's a young boy sitting quietly. He is only 12 years old. He is thin. He is hungry. He is alone. Only a few months earlier, his life had been completely different. Now he spends his days putting labels on bottles of shoe polish, wondering how everything changed so quickly. But here's the incredible part. That lonely little boy will grow up to become one of the greatest writers in history. His stories will touch millions of hearts. They will change the way people think about poverty, childhood, kindness, and hope. His name is Charles Dickens, and this is his remarkable story. Our journey begins in the year 1812. In the small coastal city of Portsmouth, England. A baby boy was born into an ordinary family. His father, John Dickens, worked as a clerk in the Navy Pay Office. His job was to keep records and handle paperwork. His mother, Elizabeth, was cheerful, warm, and full of energy. The family wasn't wealthy, but they lived comfortably. They had enough to get by, and life seemed full of promise. As Charles grew older, the family moved several times. From Portsmouth to London, and later to the quiet town of Chatham, near the sea. Those years in Chatham became some of the happiest memories of his childhood. The countryside was green and peaceful. The air was fresh. Charles spent hours running through open fields, exploring the old castle nearby, and letting his imagination wander wherever it pleased. He was a curious little boy, with an endless love for stories. Books became his greatest treasure. He read every book he could find in his father's small collection. Adventure stories excited him. Fairy tales filled him with wonder. He loved Robinson Crusoe, the story of a man surviving alone on an island. He was equally fascinated by the Arabian Nights, with its magical worlds and unforgettable adventures. Whenever Charles opened a book, he disappeared into another world. He wasn't just reading. He became the hero, the explorer, the dreamer. For a little while he was free. His father saw how much he loved books and encouraged him. They often went for long walks together, talking about the people they passed along the way. Charles paid close attention to everything around him. He noticed how people walked, how they laughed, how they spoke. He noticed the little things that most people ignored. A torn coat, a nervous smile, tired eyes, or a quiet sigh. Without realizing it, he was already learning to see the world through the eyes of a writer. One day, during one of those walks, Charles saw a beautiful house standing on top of a hill. Its name was Gad's Hill Place. He couldn't take his eyes off it. His father smiled and said, "If you work hard enough, perhaps one day you'll own a house like that." Those simple words stayed with Charles for the rest of his life. Keep that house in your mind. We'll come back to it later. But life doesn't always follow the path we expect. Sometimes everything changes in the blink of an eye. Life doesn't always change slowly. Sometimes it changes all at once. Charles's father, John Dickens, had a serious problem. He loved to spend money, often more than he earned. He bought things the family couldn't afford and lived far beyond his means. At first, it didn't seem like a disaster, but little by little, the debts kept growing. Then, in 1824, everything fell apart. Charles was only 12 years old. His father could no longer pay what he owed. In England at that time, there was a cruel law. If you couldn't pay your debts, you could be sent to prison. These places were called debtors' prisons. And that is exactly what happened. John Dickens was arrested and taken to Marshalsea Prison. His wife and the younger children moved into the prison with him, which was common in those days. Clears throat. But Charles didn't go with them. Instead, his childhood came to an abrupt end. He was sent to work. His new workplace was Warren's blacking factory, where shoe polish was made. Every day, Charles sat at a small table near a window, sticking labels onto bottles of blacking, a dark paste used to shine boots. He worked 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. For all that work, he earned just 6 shillings a week, barely enough to buy food. Can you imagine how that must have felt? A boy who loved books, a boy who dreamed of adventure, a boy whose imagination could travel anywhere, now trapped inside a cold, dirty factory, surrounded by dust, noise, and rats. Charles felt humiliated. He felt abandoned. He felt as though the world had forgotten him. Years later, when he looked back on those painful days, one question still haunted him. How could my parents let this happen to me? It was a question he carried for the rest of his life. Yet even in that dark place, something extraordinary was happening. Without realizing it, Charles was becoming a writer. He watched everything. He listened carefully. He noticed the children working beside him. Children who had no education, no opportunities, and almost no hope for a better future. After work, he wandered through the streets of London. The city was unlike anything he had ever known. It was a place of incredible wealth and heartbreaking poverty. Elegant horse-drawn carriages rolled past children sleeping on cold doorsteps. Beautiful homes stood only a few streets away from filthy alleys filled with wooden rubbish. He passed prisons. He passed workhouses, abbeys where the poorest people were forced to live and work under terrible conditions. He walked through crowded markets filled with shouting voices and endless noise. Sometimes the thick London fog became so dense that he could barely see the road in front of him. Everywhere he looked, he saw people struggling to survive. He saw beggars, he saw homeless families. He saw hunger, loneliness, and injustice, and he remembered it all. Every face, every voice, every smell, every painful moment. Although he didn't know it then, London was quietly teaching him lessons no classroom ever could. The city was filling his heart and mind with stories that would one day inspire millions of readers around the world. A few months later, hope finally arrived. Charles's father received a small inheritance from a relative who had passed away. With that money, he paid off his debts and was released from prison. The family was together again. Charles finally left the factory and returned to school. But something inside him had changed forever. Here's the remarkable part. For almost his entire life, Charles never spoke about those months in the factory. Not to his closest friends, not to his wife, not even to his children. Clear's throat. The memories were simply too painful. The shame ran too deep. Only after his death did people discover private papers in which he described those difficult days. The experience never truly left him. It remained a wound that never completely healed. But in time, that wound became his greatest strength. When Charles finished school, he found work as a clerk in a law office. It was respectable work. But it wasn't the life he wanted. The endless paperwork felt dull. The routines were repetitive. Deep inside, he knew he was meant for something more. Instead of giving up, Charles decided to learn a new skill that would change his life. He taught himself shorthand, a special way of writing that uses symbols instead of complete words. It allowed people to write as fast as someone could speak. It wasn't easy, but Charles practiced every day, until he became exceptionally good at it. Before long, that skill opened a new door. He became a newspaper reporter. His job took him to the British Parliament, where he listened to important debates and reported on the laws being discussed. He traveled across England, covering elections, political speeches, and major public events. The work was demanding, but Charles loved it. It taught him to observe carefully, write clearly, and tell a story that people wanted to read. Before long, readers began to notice something special about his writing. Clear's throat. It was fresh. It was vivid. It felt alive. Then, in 1833, something happened that Charles would never forget. He wrote a short story and nervously sent it to a magazine, hoping someone might read it. A few weeks later, it was published. For the very first time, Charles saw his own words printed on a page. It was a moment he had dreamed about for years. Later, he wrote that he wandered through the streets of London for hours that night, unable to stop smiling. Tears filled his eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of pure happiness. Imagine that feeling. After everything he had endured as a child, his dream was finally beginning to come true. More stories followed. Readers loved them. They laughed at his humor. They connected with his characters. They were moved by the emotion in his writing. Charles had discovered something extraordinary. He could make ordinary people feel extraordinary. Then, in 1836, at just 24 years old, he published his first novel, The Pickwick Papers. Instead of releasing the whole book at once, it was published, one chapter, each month in a magazine. Readers couldn't wait for the next installment. Every new chapter became an event. Families talked about it. Friends discussed it. People eagerly counted the days until the next issue arrived. It wasn't very different from waiting for the next episode of a favorite television series today. Almost overnight, Charles Dickens became one of the most famous writers in England. That same year, he married Catherine Hogarth. Together, they would raise 10 children. As his family grew, so did his responsibilities. But Charles never slowed down. He wrote day after day, often late into the night. He met impossible deadlines. He poured all his energy into every story he created, and he was only getting started. Over the next 30 years, Charles Dickens wrote some of the greatest novels ever written in the English language. One of them was Oliver Twist, the unforgettable story of a poor orphan boy struggling to survive on the streets of London. An orphan is a child whose parents have died. Oliver is hungry. Desperate for food, he holds out his empty bowl and quietly says, "Please, sir, I want some more." Those simple words became one of the most famous lines in literary history. Then came A Christmas Carol. It's the story of a cold, lonely, and greedy old man named Ebenezer Scrooge. On Christmas Eve, 3 mysterious spirits visit him. They show him his past, his present, and the future that awaits if he refuses to change. By the end of the story, Scrooge discovers that kindness, generosity, and love are worth far more than money. The book became much more than a popular story. It changed the way people thought about Christmas. Before Dickens, Christmas in England was a fairly quiet celebration. After A Christmas Carol, it became a season of family, generosity, compassion, and giving to those in need. Even today, many of the traditions we associate with Christmas were inspired by this remarkable book. And, perhaps the most amazing part, Dickens wrote it in only 6 weeks. He also wrote David Copperfield, the story of a young boy who faces hardship, heartbreak, and disappointment before finding happiness and success. Dickens often said this was his favorite novel. Many readers believe it contains more of his own life than any other book he ever wrote. Then came Great Expectations, the story of a poor boy named Pip whose dreams of becoming a gentleman lead him on an unforgettable journey. And of course, there was A Tale of Two Cities set during the dramatic years of the French Revolution. Its opening sentence has become one of the most famous in the history of literature. Clears throat. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. With every new book, Dickens created characters that readers could never forget. Some made people laugh. Some made them cry. Some frightened them. Some inspired hope. But all of them felt astonishingly real. They weren't simply characters on a page. They felt like people you could meet on the street. That was Charles Dickens' greatest gift. He didn't just write stories. He brought them to life. What made Charles Dickens truly extraordinary wasn't just his talent for telling stories. It was the people he chose to write about. Most writers of his time filled their books with kings, queens, soldiers, and famous heroes. Dickens did something different. He wrote about ordinary people. He wrote about children trapped in factories, families living in cold, dark rooms, people struggling with hunger, people who had been forgotten by society. He gave a voice to those who had none. When readers opened his books, they couldn't ignore the suffering around them anymore. His stories made people laugh. They made people cry. Most importantly, they made people care. And when people begin to care, they begin to think. And when people begin to think, change becomes possible. Charles Dickens became much more than a best-selling author. He became a voice for justice. His novels encouraged people to look more closely at the conditions inside factories, prisons, schools, and workhouses. Slowly, attitudes began to change. His words helped inspire reforms that improved the lives of countless people. But Charles wasn't finished. Writing books wasn't enough for him. He wanted people to experience his stories with him. So he began giving public readings, and he wasn't just reading words from a page. He became every character. One moment he whispered so softly, the audience leaned forward to listen. The next moment, he shouted with such energy that the entire room came alive. He changed his voice, his expressions, his movements. Watching Charles Dickens perform was like watching an entire theater cast brought to life by one person. People laughed, people cried. Sometimes they did both in the same evening. Clear's throat, crowds filled every hall where he appeared. He toured all across England and even traveled to America twice. When he arrived in New York, thousands of people gathered at the harbor just to catch a glimpse of him. Tickets for his performances sold out almost immediately. Wherever he went, people welcomed him like a celebrity. They loved his stories, they loved his characters, and they loved the passion with which he brought them to life. But success came at a price. Charles never seemed to stop working. He kept writing novels, he edited magazines, he gave speeches, he organized charity events, he traveled constantly, he poured every bit of himself into his work. Do you remember the beautiful house on the hill that young Charles admired as a child? Gad's Hill Place. The house his father once pointed to and said, "If you work hard enough, perhaps one day you'll own a house like that." In 1856, that childhood dream finally came true. Charles bought Gad's Hill Place. He lived there for the rest of his life. It was proof that dreams really can come true. But years of endless work were slowly wearing him down. His health became weaker with each passing year. His friends begged him to rest. His doctors warned him to stop traveling and performing. But Charles simply couldn't slow down. He kept writing. He kept traveling. He kept sharing stories with the world. Then in 1870, at the age of 58, everything changed. While having dinner at home, Charles Dickens suddenly suffered a stroke. He collapsed. He never regained consciousness. The following day, on June 9, 1870, one of the greatest storytellers in history passed away. The news spread quickly across England and around the world. People mourned as though they had lost a close friend. Shops closed their doors. Newspapers filled their front pages with tributes. The nation was saying goodbye to the man whose stories had touched millions of lives. Charles had asked for a simple funeral, a quiet farewell. Although his funeral remained modest, he was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, among England's greatest kings, queens, poets, and national heroes. Clear's throat. For days after his funeral, people continued to arrive with flowers. Not only wealthy admirers, not only famous people, but ordinary men, women, and children. The very people Charles had spent his life writing about. Even after he was gone, they came to thank him. And now, my friends, we've reached the end of Charles Dickens's remarkable journey. But before we say goodbye, I'd like to leave you with one simple thought. Charles Dickens began life as a frightened little boy working in a dark factory. His hands were dirty. His stomach was empty. The world barely noticed he existed. Clear's throat. But inside him burned something that no hardship could take away. A dream, a love for stories, a belief in the power of words. He protected that dream. He practiced every day. He never stopped learning. And little by little, those words changed his life. Eventually, they changed the world. In many ways, you're doing something similar right now. Every time you listen to an English story, every time you learn a new word, every time you understand a sentence you couldn't understand yesterday, you're growing. Maybe it feels slow, maybe some days are frustrating, Maybe you wonder if you're improving at all. Trust me, you are. Progress doesn't happen all at once. It happens one word at a time, one sentence at a time, one story at a time, and before you know it, you'll look back and realize just how far you've come. So keep listening, keep reading, keep learning. Your own story is still being written, and I truly believe the best chapters are still ahead of you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me here on Storyriem. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What is your favorite book or story, and why does it mean so much to you? Share your answer in the comments below. If you enjoyed learning English through this story, don't forget to subscribe and join me for many more unforgettable journeys through history. Until next time, my friends, take care, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next story.